Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of AoS Close-Ups. This week we take a look at a unit that walks the fine line between the dead and the living, the cannibalistic hordes, the flesh-eater courts, the Crypt Ghouls. We'll explore their background, their rules, and what their role is within the faction. The Age of Chaos has brought centuries of famine and war to each of the mortal realms, save Azir. Mortal men and women scavenge for survival and hide in the shadows, fearful of demons and other chaotic minions stalking the lands. Desperation is the time, and so desperate are these times that people must even battle the enemy within themselves. The enemy that is fear, a cowardice that would lead to betrayal in order to survive. The enemy greed, a selfishness that ensures the individual's survival at the expense of their comrades. And worst of all enemies, the desperate hunger, to fall upon the fallen and the weak so to eke out one more pitiful day. Even neighbors, friends, and family can be pushed far enough, causing them to turn on each other to appease the basis of base needs. And so, cannibals are born from this desperate surrender to this inner enemy. It is thought that shame from such an act causes these creatures to seek refuge in the shadowed ruins of fallen cities so to hide their vile act from the light itself. Here, cannibal cults form into hideous parodies of kingdoms kept alive by rancid flesh and bone. And yet, no matter how pathetic and woeful such a cult is, their damnation is not yet complete. It is not until such creatures partake from the abhorrent king's feast are they completely lost from redemption. The madness of the king snuffing out the last vestiges of humanity that still exist in the furthest corners of their soul. In that moment, cannibal becomes mordant. The majority of mordants that make up the Mad King's courts are the Crypt Ghouls, hordes of naked, slavering, rot-fanged beasts completely devoted to their mad masters. Alone, ghouls are dim, loathsome creatures more interested in feeding on the scraps than challenging a foe. But in packs, and armed only with their taloned claws and gaping maws, they turn into frenzied animals, consumed with an insatiable greed, leading them to quickly overwhelm and gorge on the flesh of any creature, including their own weak, before their brethren can do the same. Twistedly obscene as all this already is, the worst is not what is exhibited from without, but that lunacy in their own minds. Infected by the insanity of their king, Crypt Ghouls are unaware of the monsters that they are. Instead, they see themselves as stalwart foot soldiers and master trackers, gloriously battling for their honorable kings against barbaric invaders. They believe themselves collecting precious loot from the fallen and drinking wine in celebration, when in reality, they gorge on flesh and lap up blood. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the rules here. Now, I would say they're pretty fast compared to other infantry-like units. I know those categories don't exist, but if we were to compare them to other things that are modeled on foot, they're faster. They have a movement 6. Most things are movement 5, so that's pretty good. They're fairly fast for what they are. They're very squishy, of course, with only 1 wound and having a token 6+ save, but again, having a save is very key. It means they can benefit from cover, you can target them with Mystic Shield and it won't be irrelevant, so while it's not the strongest save out there, at least it makes a lot of other things applicable. And finally we have the Bravery stat, which means they have a terrific one. It's very potent. Remember, for every increment of 10, I should say, you increase your bravery by 1, and being that this is a squish unit and it does benefit from having a bigger unit size, you're probably going to be running it in the 30 range mark, meaning you could easily have bravery 13, which is key because these guys are going to die in droves, and any increase to your bravery stat is going to be awesome when it comes time to take battle shock tests. Now when we take a look at their offense, they're pretty ho-hum. They have 2 attacks, which is good, and they hit 50-50, which isn't bad or good. There's no rend, of course, and it only does 1 damage. I think this really plays into what they're going to be used for, which isn't to, get in there and wipe out units. We'll go into that in the next section, of course. I would say overall, offensively, they're weak, but they're not completely irrelevant. So let's look at their abilities. Of course, we mentioned Battalion Strength earlier. Gives the Crypt Ghouls +1 to their attack characteristic if they have 20 or more models, meaning they'll have 3 attacks each. Of course, it only has a 1-inch range, so it's going to be hard to get every model into base, in your first round of combat. Maybe as the combat develops, you can start bringing some more in. And then the other ability is called Royal Approval, which gives them rerolls. It's contingent rerolls, but it's rerolls nonetheless. You get to reroll 1s if you're within 15 inches of a abhorrent Crypt Ghoul king. So overall, that's what we have for stats. So let's talk about what they're good for on the tabletop. Now, in order to discover the role of the Crypt Ghouls, we have to kind of step out of this kind of two-dynamic system that we like to view things as, and that's notably offensive and defense. And that means that in terms of inherent defensiveness and just the amount of dice you can roll or how efficient your dice rolls are going to be. Obviously, the ghouls are not great in either of those spheres. They're incredibly squishy, and they're not terribly accurate, or they don't have a lot of hard-hitting offense on the damage side. However, there are a lot of roles for them in Age of Sigmar, because Age of Sigmar actually has a lot more depth to it than just those two spheres. And so the first thing, and this is going to be kind of obvious, and maybe you won't appreciate it as much, but the first role that they have is they're great for sitting on objectives. Objectives that you already are going to need to be defensive about. Now, I know any unit can do that, but the key to this is if you play 40k, I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of Nurgle units sitting on objectives while your more powerful units go out there and do what they need to do. And the ghouls kind of function that same kind of lane. They sit on an objective and free up your killer units, your more elite units, to not have to worry about playing a dual role in that game. So that's one role that they have. They free you up to use your other units how you want more efficiently. The next thing that ghouls are good for are that they block lanes of approach. You can set out a defensive perimeter further ahead of the objective and kind of pin units in place, keep them out of certain parts of the board earlier on. And even though they're not incredibly resilient as far as rules are concerned when we look at stats as saves and wounds, they are resilient in that they have a lot of synergies with many of the courtiers in the Flesh Court's army list, and some of the other formations you can bring, most notably the Ghoul Patrol. So again, the second role I would say is that they're good at blocking lanes of approach. Now, kind of along the same lines, I think their other role is that they're good at locking units in combat, not only to block the lanes of approach, but keep your opponent from being able to assist in combats. The ghouls are going to be meant to lose combats, but what's most important is that they will die sacrificing themselves to units that otherwise respond to maybe your more alpha striking units. Say you have a very offensive unit strike maybe a semi-offensive unit, maybe a more defensive unit on one part of your opponent's battle line. And a lot of times if you don't have a unit like ghouls, what will happen is you'll hit their unit, you'll do your damage, maybe you'll even wipe them out, and then the corresponding turn, your opponent will respond, bring his unit in, and then wipe out your very, very good alpha striking unit or whatnot. So this allows to mess with that predictability. There's no more I go into you, then you go into me. It's more like I'm going to lock you in place, and then I'm going to have my better units hit you where I need them to hit first. So again, lock units in place during combat so they can't assist where maybe your horrors or your flayers are going. Now, the other thing I think they're good at is they're great at bogging your opponent down with attrition, and not only in regards to casualties, because again, they're not terribly offensive. They will, maybe do a couple of key wounds here and there, but more importantly, they're attritioning the time. You're usually only playing a game that's maybe 4 to 6 turns, and if you can get a unit here that you don't really care about, that's just going to tie your opponent up, then you can burn time towards your advantage. So again, they're really good at that. So overall, I think they're great at sacrifice. And that will conclude this episode of AoS Close-Ups. Please like and subscribe. Feel free to comment below about what unit you'd like to see next. And thank you for watching.